Trump confronted by Lady Veteran at live press conference. What he does next shocks everyone. Have you ever felt like the world has abandoned you when you've given everything, your sweat, your tears, even your blood, just to be met with nothing but closed doors? Sophia Walker, a valiant veteran, previously braved gunfire on the battlefield. But she couldn't win the hardest battle of all, obtaining a suitable job after leaving the military, rejected time and over again. She had just one thing left: determination. And that determination propelled her to make the boldest, craziest decision of her life in the middle of a high-profile press conference, surrounded by hundreds of media. She stood up, locked eyes with the President of the United States, Donald Trump. He delivered the words that made an entire nation pause its breath. "Mr. President, I need a job." Trump's statement didn't simply change Sophia's life. It kindled a revolution for thousands of American soldiers. What occurred next? And why did the entire country stand still in awe at his decision? Stay with us, because what you're going to experience will leave you speechless. The cold winter wind howled across the streets of Washington, D.C., sending dry leaves blowing over the pavements on a worn-out wooden bench in Lafayette Park, immediately across from the White House. Sophia Walker sat in silence, hands jammed deep into the pockets of her small jacket. She curled into herself, not simply from the cold, but from the emptiness biting at her soul. 1 year ago, she was First Lieutenant Sophia Walker, a decorated military officer. Directing war logistics operations, she had commanded a U.S. Army battalion in Afghanistan, managing supply lines, saving colleagues from life-threatening circumstances, and making split-second judgments that impacted who survived and who didn't. She had previously given commands to hundreds of soldiers. Now she couldn't even get a recruiting manager to read her begin. On the day she left the military, Sophia felt that her years of service would open doors to a bright future. But reality was rougher than she ever expected. Thousands of job applications were rejected without a single relevant explanation. The instant company saw the word veteran on her resume, they didn't hesitate to turn her away. "We're seeking individuals with industry expertise. Your resume is outstanding, but we're concerned that military culture may not connect with our corporate environment." The same comments over and over, like a quiet verdict passed down to her, and countless other veterans exactly like her. Her savings were running out, expenses piled more. Every week and 3 days earlier, her landlord posted an eviction notice taped to her door. Sophia Walker, a woman who'd once led men through the turmoil of war, was now fighting to make the most basic survival decisions: buy food or pay rent that night at her empty apartment. She switched on the TV. A live news conference with President Donald Trump filled the screen. He spoke about the economy, about employment creation, about America's future. But none of it mattered to her. She was a forgotten soldier in a country that had moved on without her. A thought raced across her thoughts. A mad thinking: she was going to go there. She was going to find the president, and she was going to ask him one thing: "Mr. President, can you give me a possibility?" Sophia glanced at the television, her pulse pumping with a mix of fear and adrenaline. She knew this might be a horrible error. Security would be tight. She could get thrown out, or worse, caught. But she also knew one thing: if she didn't do this, she had nothing left to lose. As the clock struck midnight, Sophia rose to her feet, her eyes brimming with resolve. Tomorrow she would step into the biggest struggle of her life, a combat with no bullets, no visible enemies, yet more barriers than she had ever encountered before. She slipped on her worn-out coat, grasped the strap of her purse tightly, and stepped out of her apartment. The last time her fight wasn't finished, it was just beginning. As Sophia pulled her knee cloak tightly about her as she walked briskly through the crowded streets of Washington, D.C., her breath formed little clouds in the frigid air. Huge structures loomed overhead. Strangers raced past her, engrossed in their own lives. The city had its own rhythm, a structured order, yet she felt entirely out of position in it. She had no invitation, no press credentials, no official justification to be anywhere near the president's press conference. Yet she had one thing no one else did: unbreakable determination. The gathering grew denser. As Sophia approached the hotel hosting the press briefing, police cars guarded the streets, security officers supervised every entry with tight precision. Journalists and photographers pressed against one another, all fighting for the best position. Camera flashes lit up the night. Voices fought as reporters fired forth quick questions at a fish entering the building. Sophia took a big breath. If she stepped in, unprepared, she would be stopped quickly. She needed a plan. A group of local reporters had just arrived. They wore press credentials around their necks and carried little cameras. A notion raced through her mind. She straightened her stance, adjusted her tone, and stepped approaching them with quiet confidence. "Excuse me, are you at the Washington Post?" she inquired, pretending to check a list. The man in the center turned to her, caught off guard. "No, we're from the Baltimore Sun." Sophia nodded, preserving her demeanor professional perfect. "I'm assisting with media coordination. Do you have your press passes?" The man instinctively lifted his badge, a little laminated card replete with a newsroom logo, a photo, and the bold phrase "press." "Wonderful," she stated smoothly. "The press entry is over there. Move swiftly, or you'll lose a fantastic location." She gestured toward an other entrance farther away from security checks as they turned to leave. Sophia grasped the moment and slipped into the moving crowd, mixing in with the flow of journalists headed. Inside, she walked quickly, but not too quickly. No one saw she was in, but before she could breathe in relief, a loud voice cut through the clamor behind her. "Where's your press?" Sophia froze. A tall security officer, his piercing eyes latched onto her, stood just a few steps away. She knew that if she hesitated even for a second, it would be over. Thus, she didn't flinch. She didn't panic. Instead, she smiled softly and gave a quiet, steady nod. "I don't have a press pass," she replied, her voice firm. The officer squinted his eyes. Then, "What are you doing here?" Sophia met his stare without wavering. "I'm a veteran. I'm here because I need to speak to the president." Examined her arms, slowly crossing across his chest. "A veteran. That's a wonderful narrative. But do you truly think the president has time for just anyone who shows up unannounced?" Sophia's hands curled into fists at her sides. She could feel her pulse quicken. Yet she didn't back down. "Did you serve?" she said. The officer paused. Then, after a time, he offered a single nod. 8 years in the Marine Corps." Sophia inhaled deeply. Then, "You understand. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not a politician. I'm not a journalist. I'm just a soldier who once risked everything for this nation. And now, when I need a chance to survive, no one will give me one. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for favors. I just need a job, and I will not leave till I utter those things to the president." A long pause filled the gap between them. Suddenly, something extremely unexpected happened. The officer let out a long sigh and took a step back. "Last row. Don't reason." Sophia couldn't believe what she had just heard. She offered him a heartfelt nod. "Thank you." Her heart pumped wildly as she went inside. The press room, she had made it. But the battle was far from over inside. Hundreds of reporters had already taken their seats. Cameras stood poised, ready to catch every second of the event on stage. The historic White House insignia was projected against the backdrop, and at the center of the room, the empty podium waited for the entrance of the most powerful man in the country. Sophia clenched her fists. She had only one shot, 1 second. If she didn't speak at the proper time, everything would be over. She took a long breath, trying herself to be calm, because when the president walked out, she wouldn't only be facing him. She would be facing the eyes of an entire nation. She had come too far to turn back. Now the press conference was set to begin. Sophia sat in the very bottom row of the press room, grasping the hem of her coat. Her heartbeat hammering in her breast around her journalists adjusted their cameras, checked their mics, and prepared to record the president's every word. Then at the podium, the backstage doors burst open, and Donald Trump stepped in. A burst of camera flashes erupted. The peaceful murmuring in the room faded in an instant as he moved confidently to the podium. With his distinctive presence, he offered a modest nod to the audience surveying the room, before saying, "Thank you everybody for being here today. We have many critical concerns to discuss anything from the economy and international policy to jobs and social." When the rapid clatter of keyboards filled the room as reporters rushed to take notes, Sophia gulped hard, her throat dry. She didn't care about the economy. She didn't care about international policy. She cared about one thing: her opportunity and the thousands of veterans just like her. The news conference continued on for over 30 minutes, crammed with queries regarding national issues. Sophia listened, but deep down, she knew if she didn't act, now she would be invisible forever. A male reporter stood up and asked the final question, something about foreign affairs. Trump responded quickly, then glanced at his aides. One of them gave him a tiny nod, signifying that the conference was ended. "Thank you, everyone," Trump said, prepared to turn away from the podium. This was it before she really realized what she was doing. Sophia stood up. "Mr. President," the packed room became dead silence. Every head snapped in her direction, cameras whirled around, focusing on the unexpected voice. Several journalists blinked in surprise, while others leaned toward their colleagues, muttering in astonishment. On stage, Trump lifted an eyebrow. No one, not even seasoned reporters, was allowed to blurt out a query like that. Instantly, Secret Service agents move, ready to intercede. Sophia took a big breath, feeling the weight of the occasion pushing down on her. There was no room for doubt. She lifted her chin, stood tall, and spoke not as a desperate job seeker, but as a soldier giving an order on the battlefield. "My name is Sophia Walker. I served as a first lieutenant in the United States Army, and I need a job." The room froze. No one talked. Some reporters whispered in surprise. Others frantically scribbled, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Cameras zoomed in, recording every spark of emotion on her face on stage. Trump crossed his arms, observing her with piercing eyes. Then, after a few beats of tense quiet, he whispered, his voice low, domineering, and unreadable. "What did you just say?" Sophia clenched her fists, steadying her breath. Her voice did not tremble. "I served our country for 10 years, yet when I arrived home, I noticed something. No one wants to hire a seasoned friend like me. I've sent out dozens of employment applications. Every single one was denied. I'm not here begging for pity. I just need a chance to prove that I am worth something." A ripple of murmurs went across the crowd. Several reporters exchanged glances. Others turned to one another with intrigue. This had never happened before. A complete stranger, a veteran, standing up in the middle of a high-profile news conference, challenging the President of the United States to give her a chance. Trump cocked his head slightly, his eyes examining Heru. "Telling me you can't locate a work?" Sophia nodded. "No one wants to hire a veteran. Some say we can't adjust. Others are afraid we're ruined. But do you know what hurts the most, Mr. President?" She took a calm breath. "We gave our youth, our strength, our lives for this country. And when we come back, this country turns its back on us." A heavy quiet descended over the room. Even Trump's closest advisors, generally fast to prep responses, stared at each other, apprehensive. This wasn't simply a political query. This was a cry for help. A public challenge broadcast live to millions. Trump's stare hardened. "What do you want?" Sophia's hands clenched at her sides. "I want a job, not a favor, not charity. I want the chance to prove that soldiers are not burdens. We are this country's greatest asset." Trump fell silent for a moment. He brushed his fingers lightly down the podium, his eyes narrowing in thought suddenly without warning. He sat down. His briefing papers set both hands on the podium and locked eyes with her. "Come up here." The entire room jolted. A couple, reporters breathed sharply. Others hurried to flick open their notebooks, hoping to record every word. Secret Service agents tightened their bodies, tensing, as if preparing for the unexpected. Sophia's heart thumped against her ribs. For a few seconds she paused. Then, like a soldier respond, toe straight instruction, she stepped forward. She moved past rows of astonished reporters, past curious questioning gazes, past cameras that filmed every single step. This moment, this particular time would impact her life forever. And no matter what happened next, she would never regret speaking up. Sophia walked forward, feeling the weight of every single eye in the room on her. The press conference dropped into absolute silence. The only sound left was the steady, purposeful echo of her footsteps on the shiny floor. She had faced shots, LED rescue operations, and survived the battlefield. Yet standing before the most powerful man in America, in front of millions, watching at home made her heart race like never before. Trump remained, stood, both hands planted firmly on the stage, his piercing stare fixed onto her as she approached. No rush nor reluctance. He was assessing her, weighing every word she had just spoken. Sophia stopped a few feet from the podium. She stood straight, shoulders squared, her eyes unflinching. "I served this nation for 10 years. I oversaw a logistics unit in Afghanistan, ensuring that hundreds of soldiers received the resources they needed to live on the battlefield. I've operated under unimaginable pressure. I've made life or death decisions in seconds, but when I arrived home, no one needed me longer." Trump quietly crossed his arms across his chest, nodding slightly. "You're telling me you can't find a job?" Sophia swallowed hard. "No company will hire me. They look at my resume and see one thing: veteran, and just like that, they presume I can't adjust. I have psychological troubles. They say I can't work in a team, that I don't know how to function outside the military." The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in, recording every flash of emotion on her face. Other journalists typed furiously, believing they were seeing a moment that will be talked approximately for years. Trump cocked his head slightly. "So tell me, what do you want?" Sophia didn't flinch. "I want a chance. Not a handout. Not charity. Just a job. An opportunity to prove that I am not worthless, that soldiers are not a burden to this country." Trump was silent. He turned slightly, staring at his advisors. Some of them exchanged awkward glances, plainly put off by the scenario. This wasn't a query they had prepared, for this was real. This was raw, and millions were watching. After a long pause, Trump returned to Sophia. His voice was calm, slow, but forceful. "You're right about one thing. This country has a big problem with how we treat our soldiers. We praise them while they go to battle, but when they come back, the system forgets them." Sophia didn't break eye contact. Trump planted both hands on the stage. "You headed a military unit. You oversaw logistics personnel, crisis management. Do you believe you could work in the government?" The crowd exploded in hushed whispers. A few reporters gasped audibly. Others exchanged startled stares. This wasn't what everyone expected from today's press presentation. Sophia froze for half a second. She had prepared herself for rejection, for someone to tell her she didn't belong here yet. This question, this changed everything. She straightened her shoulders and met Trump's gaze full on. "If you give me a chance, I will outwork everyone. I shall prove that veterans are more than just soldiers. We have discipline. We have loyalty. We have a sense of duty that doesn't cease when the uniform comes off. We don't need pity. We just need a means in." Trump nodded as if he had made up his mind. He turned to one of his advisors. "Dowie, have an open post at the Department of Veterans Affairs." The advisor hesitated, adjusting his spectacles. "We could look at it, sir. But the recruiting procedure is hard. There are protocols." Trump cut him off. "She's a veteran. That's the only resume I need." The entire crowd held its breath. Sophia felt her heartbeat hammering in her chest. Was this really occurring? Trump turned back to her, his voice hard, leaving no room for question. On Monday, you will report to the Department of Veterans Affairs. We need someone who understands the problems inside the system, so we can repair them. And I believe no one is better qualified for that position than someone who has gone through it. The room exploded. Journalists hurried to type cameras. World and reporters exchanged shocked glances. This was history unfolding in real moment. Some sat slack-jawed in surprise. Others whispered, scarcely suppressing their delight. Sophia felt her legs wobble. For a single second she had come here ready to fight, to debate, to beg. She'd never expected to win right here, right now. She swallowed the lump in her throat and straightened her posture. Eyes latched onto the president. Thank you, Mr. President. I won't let you down. Trump gave a little smirk. Okay. I anticipate you to honor that pledge. The room broke into a frenzy. Phones rang off the hook. News outlets hurried to break the story. Big news: President Trump hires veteran on the spot at press conference. Sophia took a deep breath. She knew this was just the beginning. She had gotten the opportunity, but now she had to prove she deserved it. The mood in the press room was explosive. President Donald Trump's statements hadn't merely startled his advisors. They had astonished the entire country, enlisting a veteran on the spot, without any formal hiring process. A brave, extraordinary history-making decision. Our reporter in the first row jumped up, his hand, his voice a mix of disbelief and challenge. Mr. President, are you certain? Regarding this choice, can someone with no prior government experience perform such a crucial position? Trump didn't flinch. A slight smirk crossed his lips, his eyes glittering with confidence. She's never worked in government, but she's served this country in the battlefield. And I trust the judgment of someone who has risked their life for America more than I trust half the bureaucrats running this place. A senior White House aide moved near a colleague, whispering, should we put a stop to this? This is too risky. But Trump had made up his mind. He went back to Sophia, his voice firm, forceful. On Monday, you will report to the Department of Veterans Affairs, not as a favor, not as a PR gimmick, but because you stood up and demanded what should have been yours all along. The room buzzed with an unrelenting wave of whispers. Cameras swung about, getting every angle. Reporters scribbled feverishly, some exchanging suspicious glances, others arguing whether this was a genuine moment or a political move. Sophia stood frozen in position. A maelstrom of emotions raged inside her. Astonishment, amazement, but above all, an overpowering sense of duty. She had never anticipated receiving this opportunity, especially not like this. But now, with millions of eyes fastened onto her, she couldn't back down. She took a firm breath, looked Trump directly in the eye, and uttered with steadfast conviction, "Thank you, Mr. President. I won't let you down." Trump nodded once before going back to the reporters. Any more questions? A reporter quickly shot up, his voice laced with doubt. Is this simply a political trick? Do you honestly believe that someone with no prior government experience can make a real difference? Trump grinned, crossed his arms, and delivered a reaction that made the room explode. Good question. When she was out on the battlefield, no one asked if she had experience. They just cared about one thing: could she achieve the mission? And I believe she can. The room erupted. Keyboards clattered at lightning speed. Journalists leaned into hushed, feverish chats. This instant, this particular moment would dominate the news. A chill rushed down Sophia's spine. She had never been trusted like this, never been granted a duty this big yet. That also meant failure was not an option that night. The story of Sophia Walker's interaction with President Trump topped every major news outlet. Headlines blared on TV screens, newspapers, and social media feeds. Some lauded it as a big start toward mending a flawed system that has long ignored veterans. Others saw it as political theater, an impetuous action with no genuine strategy. But to Sophia, none of it mattered. She knew just one thing. On Monday, she will go into a new battlefield. No guns, no foes in uniform, but a battle just as savage the fight. Against bureaucrats, a fight to bring justice to the forgotten soldiers who, like her, had been cast away. Monday morning, Sophia stood outside the towering headquarters of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inhaling deeply, the structure loomed over her, a fortress of government bureaucracy. But what concerned her wasn't its size. It was what waited for her inside. She had heard the stories, unending backlogs of claims, veterans waiting years for benefits, men and women imprisoned in a system that was supposed to aid them only to be buried under its weight. And now she was no longer an outsider looking in. Now she was inside the fight. She pushed open the large glass doors and stepped in. Bright overhead lighting, employees crouched over paperwork, phones ringing non-stop. At first impression, it appeared like any other government building. But as Sophia made her way near the front desk, she felt it. The stairs' heads turned. Eyes lingered, a mix of wonder and doubt. Then Amin, in his 50s, wearing silver-rimmed glasses, walked toward her. There was no warmth in his look. "You must be Sophia Walker." She nodded. "Yes. The president appointed me to work here." The man crossed his arms across his chest, his gaze examining her with silent mistrust. "I'm Richard Coleman, head of human resources. Let me be clear, this isn't a battlefield, and we don't function on commands and compliance like the military." Sophia held her ground. "I'm not here to give instructions. I'm here to work." Coleman smirked, unconvinced. He turned in motion to an assistant. A second later, a towering stack of files was dumped onto the desk in front of her. "Good. Then start with these." Sophia took the files. However, the instant she scanned through the first few pages, her stomach twisted in anger. Some applications had been gathering dust for. During 3 years, some veterans had been denied compensation for reasons as obscure as insufficient documentation or lack of acceptable medical verification. One case caught her notice: a soldier who had fought in Iraq, injured in an explosion. His claims for medical compensation has been in evaluation for over 2 years. Sophia looked up, her voice crisper. "Then before some of these veterans have been waiting for years. Why haven't these cases been processed?" Coleman shrugged. "That's the system. Everything needs to be reviewed correctly." Sophia pushed her lips together, inhaling deeply. However, when she stated, the fury in her voice was tough to ignore. "That's not a system. That's a failure." A few employees close glanced over. Sensing the tension, Coleman crossed, his arms raising an eyebrow. "You may have the president's backing, Walker, but you're not going to change the way things work here overnight." Sophia locked eyes with Coleman. "No, I can't change everything overnight, but I can start today without waiting for a response." She grabbed the towering stack of files and marched toward her freshly assigned workstation. Later that day, Sophia buried herself in the backlog of veteran claims, studying each case. A pattern rapidly emerged. The more difficult the situation, the longer it had been delayed. Serious injuries, psychological stress. The veterans who needed care the most were the ones waiting the longest. Enough was enough. She grabbed up the phone and dialed the number of one of the veterans. On the list, Michael Turner, 67 years old. Vietnam War veteran, applied for disability advantages in 2019. Still no response. The phone rang numerous times before a voice responded, rough, fatigued, worn out by years of waiting. "Hello." Sophia straightened in her chair. "Mr. Turner, my name is Sophia Walker. I'm with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm evaluating your disability claim, and I see it's been delayed for 3 years. I wanted to contact out and see how I can help." A bitter laugh reverberated through the line. "3 years. Sweetheart, I've been waiting 15. Sophia held the phone closer, a surge of rage and hopelessness growing in her chest. "Have you ever received any reaction at all?" Turner let out a dry giggle at first. "Yeah, They told me I needed to submit more documentation. Then, after that, nothing I phoned hundreds of times every time the answer was the same. Your file is under evaluation at some moment. I just stopped calling. Sophia clenched her mouth, rage blazing in her chest. Guys, like Michael Turner, had devoted their youth, their strength, their very lives to safeguard our country. And now, when they needed aid the most, they were abandoned. Mr. Turner, I guarantee you your file will not be ignored for one more day. She hung up then. Without hesitation, she turned on her heel and marched straight into Coleman's office. Coleman looked up, raising an eye at the fire in her eyes. He need to know why a veteran has been waiting over a decade for benefits and still has nothing. Coleman let out a sigh, relaxing back in his chair. As I told you, the claims process is tough. We get thousands of applications every year. And Sophia flung a stack of folders onto his desk, cutting him off. These humans are not numbers on a spreadsheet. They are human beings battling every single day just to survive. They deserve better than a society that treats people like they don't exist. Coleman narrowed his brows. Do you really think you can modify this system? Sophia didn't blink. I don't think I know. Coleman studied her for a long minute. Then he shook his head and let out a quiet giggle. I've seen folks like you before, fired up, determined. But then they understand that Washington doesn't change just because one person wants it to. Sophia's hands curled at her sides. I don't need Washington to change overnight. I just need them to realize they can't ignore me. She turned and walked out, knowing full well she had just made a formidable enemy inside the Department of Veterans Affairs. Yet that didn't matter. She hadn't come here to make friends. She had come here to fight. Her first day had been anything but easy. But she understood this was merely the beginning. She was no longer on a battlefield with bullets rushing by her head, but here, surrounded by bureaucratic red tape and a system that fought change. She was still in a battle, and this was a fight she meant to win. Sophia always claimed that the toughest battlefield she had ever encountered was one where an explosion may take a life in a second. But suddenly she knew there was another kind of battlefield, one where the opponents didn't carry weapons. Instead, they hid behind nice suits, polished tables, and mounds of paperwork. They controlled the fate of thousands of veterans, not with guns, but with bureaucracy. She had a plan. Step 1. She needed allies. Sophia began reaching out to veteran support organizations, listening to the tales of individuals the system had abandoned. She spoke with former service members, men and women still fighting a different kind of battle. Every day, a battle against red tape, enormous paperwork, and an unsympathetic system. One of the first veterans she spoke with was Hank Lawson, a Vietnam War veteran. He had been waiting for disability benefits for 15 years. His claim had been delayed and refused repeatedly over a minor pretext, insufficient evidence. They met at a tiny, quiet cafe. Hank took one look. Her let out a dry chuckle and shook his head. You honestly think you can change the system, kid? His voice was gruff, likely from years of smoking in the service. Sophia didn't flinch. I don't think I know. Hank took a cautious drink of coffee, peering at her folks. Before you have stated the same thing. Then they gave up. Sophia stood motionless for a beat. Then she dug inside her backpack and placed a folder on the table. I researched your case. I found 3 letters dated all the way back to 2010, claiming your claim was under review. But the truth is, no one has touched it in over a decade. Hank let out a bitter laugh. Yet there was no comedy in it. Same old narrative, and you believe you can alter that? Sophia nodded firmly. Not just for you, but for hundreds of other soldiers like you. But I need your help. Hank raised an eyebrow. Help with what? I need you to tell your story. The more voices we raise, the harder it will be for the system to ignore us. Hank observed her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. All right, kid. If you're willing to fight, then I won't sit back and watch. English adaptation compelling Washington to listen. This was just the first step. Next, Sophia wanted to make Washington listen. She sought out to the media, writing letters to journalists, sharing stories like Hank's. At first, most disregarded her. They had heard stories like this 1,000 times before. But Sophia refused to be ignored. She called. She left voicemails. She even waited outside newsrooms hoping to catch a journalist. In person, ultimately, a reporter from the Washington Post consented to meet with her. Rachel Miller sat across from her arms, folded suspicion in her eyes. "What do you want from me?" Sophia met her. "Look, I want you to disclose the truth. This system is failing the very people who once risked their lives for this country. I have evidence, I have witnesses. I simply need you to assist. Put their testimonies to the public." Rachel remained silent for a long minute. Then she stretched out and retrieved the folder of paperwork Sophia had brought. "I'll look into it." It wasn't a promise, but it was something, a first crack in the wall of silence. Meantime, inside the Department of Veterans Affairs, Sophia kept pushing. From within, she asked a review of the longest delayed cases, working directly with workers to accelerate the process. But not everyone welcomed her presence. Richard Coleman, head of human resources, called her into his office. His annoyance was hardly contained. "You're making a lot of difficulty." Sophia didn't flinch. "If fighting for only for veterans is causing issues, then sure. I am." Coleman let out a dry chuckle. "You truly think you can reform a system that's been in place for decades?" Sophia's voice was steady. "I don't think I know." Coleman smirked, leaning back. "Let's see how far you receive." Sophia knew this wasn't going to be simple, but she also knew one thing. Foreigner, a soldier doesn't retreat just because the adversary is stronger. She had began this fight, and she wasn't backing down. 1 year after Sophia set foot inside the Department of Veterans Affairs, America watched a change no one had dreamed imaginable. From a forgotten soldier to a head of reform, she had been one of the most essential players in revamping the veteran support system. Processes that earlier took years were now streamlined. Thousands of backlog files were finally handled. Warriors who had lost all hope were finally receiving the aid they deserved. But the road wasn't easy. Sophia had experienced unseen roadblocks, pushback from career officials who didn't want to see the system change, isolation, intimidation, and frequent warnings that if she kept stirring the pot, she would lose her position. But she never backed down. She utilized the power of the media to reveal the truth. She visited with suffering veterans, recorded their tales, and transformed public pressure into an unstoppable force. She collaborated with nonprofits and rallied private sector backing to offer career prospects for persons who had once served their nation. And in the end, her relentless struggle impacted everything. Using the media to bring the facts to light, she visited face-to-face with suffering soldiers, documenting their stories, applying public pressure on the system. She worked with organizations, rallied private sector businesses, and created work chances for individuals who had formerly served their country. And her relentless struggle altered the game. Today, she stood on a stage inside the White House, side by side with President Donald Trump. The room was filled with reporters, flashes from cameras flickered non-stop. Millions of Americans were watching. Trump went up to the platform. His gaze swept across the room before he spoke. His voice deep, steady, full of authority. 1 year ago, he met a woman at a press conference precisely like this. She had nothing in her hands except guts and a simple question. "Mr. President, can you give me a chance?" The room fell silent. Sophia stood tall, her back straight, her eyes set forward. She did not flinch. Trump's voice grew louder today. "I stand here to tell you." She didn't simply take that chance. She turned it into a movement because of her tireless efforts. Tens of thousands of veterans are finally receiving the attention they need. People who were formerly neglected are finally being heard. Trump glanced toward Sophia, a genuine smile crossing his lips, and for her, Great contributions. I am delighted to inform Sophia Walker will formally take on the post of Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the United States. The room exploded. Journalists scrambled to take notes. Cameras swooped in to capture every flash of emotion on Sophia's face. Several cheered in adoration. Others sat astonished, mouths slightly open in disbelief. Sophia's heartbeat. She had never imagined coming this far. 1 year ago, she had been a jobless veteran standing in the middle of a press conference begging for a chance. And suddenly, she wasn't the one asking anymore. She was the one leading. She walked forward, grabbing the microphone from Trump's hand. Her voice was strong, yet filled with emotion. When I left the military, I felt invisible. I didn't know what happened next. I wasn't alone. Millions more veterans face the same issues, unnoticed, abandoned. She took a long breath. Then she stared right into the camera. Asif speaking directly to every warrior watching from home. But I stand here tonight to inform every veteran listening, you are not invisible. We will fight to guarantee that every veteran who leaves the military has a clear path ahead. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. Applause thundered through the room that night. Word of Sophia's appointment filled every headline and social media stream. Veterans from across America inundated her inbox with letters, emails, and words of thanks. One young soldier preparing to depart the military wrote to her, "Because of you, I'm no longer terrified of what comes next." Sophia took the letter in her hands, her vision blurring with passion. She knew the war wasn't done. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. She had started a movement, and it would only become stronger. Sophia sat alone in her new office, gazing out the wide window of the Department of Veterans Affairs outside. Life proceeded as usual. Folks raced through their daily routines, oblivious of the quiet revolution that had gone place. But she knew that, because of the relentless struggle over the last year, thousands of veterans have discovered a new route forward. She picked up the final mail of the day, a handwritten note from a newly released soldier. "I thought my life was ended when I left the military, but because of you, I have hope. Thank you for battling for us." Sophia placed the letter down, closing her eyes for a moment. She had once been the forgotten one, unseen and unheard. But now she had not only recovered her own future, she had helped countless of others do the same. She turned back toward the cameras. A bunch of reporters stood ready, their lenses focused on her. This wasn't just another interview. This was a chance to convey a message. I am not the only one who has ever felt forgotten. Millions of veterans out there are facing the same problem. They sacrificed, they battled. Yet when they came home, they had to start over from nothing. No one should have to go through that. She paused, her voice falling, but filled with unwavering determination. But we can change this. We can establish a future where every soldier leaving the service has a clear route ahead. A future where they no longer have to fight simply to be noticed, but are received with gratitude and the respect they deserve. She gazed directly into the camera, as if speaking straight to every single person watching. If you know a veteran who is struggling, listen to them. If you have the chance, help them. And if you feel that those who dedicated their young to safeguard our country deserve a second opportunity, then stand with us. Share this story, increase awareness, and most vital, never let those who served be forgotten. A sad silence filled the room. Reporters nodded slowly. Cameras remained filming. Sophia took a deep breath, then smiled softly. My tale is not only mine. This is the narrative of millions of veterans across America, and I believe with your support, we can create a new chapter, a tale of belief, of transformation, of justice. She rose up. She walked out of the room, ready to whatever was next. Top of form, bottom of form.